Speaking of struggling to defend the run, let's go to our next team. And a lot of people were asking us, all right, when are you going to talk Texas A&M? When are you going to acknowledge how broken they are? And to you, it's right now. If you're watching this in the full length episode, you're listening to it on the podcast, or maybe you're watching this specific YouTube video, here's your moment to hear all the problems with Texas A&M and hopefully learn a little bit about what we would suggest. And I think what Texas A&M has already taken several steps to fix numerous issues. But guys, the problems are abundant. No doubt that this team was out over its skis in 2022. The recruiting class, the hype that came with that, the best recruiting class of all time, it was offset a little bit once you got into the season by the lack of true leadership in a senior class. It was a tiny senior class, and with that, you didn't have the juniors kind of step up and institute the culture that A&M football is frankly known for. People like to dog on Texas A&M for the traditions and whatever, but if you're saying that Texas A&M historically doesn't have good culture in their locker room, then you're not paying attention. Jimbo, since he's come in, has changed that program around. And, look, 8, 9, 10 win seasons, whatever you want to, complain about, there were real results that Jimbo was seeing. Now, this being year 5, this was supposed to be that beginning of the championship window, right? He's had 4 years to institute everything. He's recruited the heck out of the country. This was supposed to be the year that you saw a difference, and instead it went 180 degrees the other way. The offense was beyond broken, and that is what you've heard most of the press clippings about, was that this offense could not consistently move the football. They couldn't keep the chains moving on third down. The number of times that we watched that Aggie team go 3-and-out to start a game was frightening. I mean, they came out with no juice to start any of these games and put your defense on the back foot. Combine all of that with a first-year defensive coordinator who is running 3-man fronts with one of the most talented defensive line units in America, and still you were unable to stop the run. And ultimately, it just created a system that bred deficits early and often in games. I mean, we've talked about the deficit for the South Carolina game before on this podcast, and it was like at that point you're down 17-0. That team is not built to come back. So issues offensively, issues on defense, a rotten culture spoiled by several bad apples who have since been kicked off the team. That's one thing that people say these guys left. Well, a couple of them were kicked off the team with no invite back, right? Looking at you, Denver Harris and LSU. So yes, is it a failure for the coaching staff to keep them in line, develop them, and bring them into the culture? Absolutely. Some of this is on the kids as well. With all of that background stated, though, let's start with the offense. What's the fix for Texas A&M on the offensive side of the ball to be able to win 9, 10 games consistently?
It's simplifying things for Connor Wegman. I really think it's as simple as that. He is a talented kid. You saw the flashes of it this past year in the Ole Miss game, in the LSU game. Dude's talented. The dude can spin it. The dude can make a lot of really difficult throws. Jimbo's offense the past couple of years was just too complex for the guys that he had behind center, and he's used to having some really talented guys back there. You think back to Jameis Winston at Florida State, some of the other guys that went on to the NFL, EJ Manuel, Christian Ponder, even Kellen Mond, who he got the luxury of having for his first 3 years at Texas A&M. I think a lot of Texas A&M fans that maybe slandered Kellen Mond are maybe taking back some of those words that they said about him and
Mm-hmm.
just how he was able to, manage that offense. He wasn't perfect by any means, but he got a hold of Jimbo's offense, especially for that 2020 season. And I think the hope for Texas A&M fans is you've got Bobby Petrino coming in, who's not known for having the most complex offense in the world, but he is known for having a very explosive offense historically. I know it's been up and down at Missouri State. He's definitely had talent issues there. He's not going to have talent issues at A&M. He's going to have some of the most talented players on paper that he's ever been able to coach. And I think that's going to really help. And I think slowing things down, and really playing to his quarterback strengths are going to change a lot of things for Texas A&M because time and time again this year, what we saw was just asking guys like Haynes King, Max Johnson, even Connor Wegman a bit to do things that just aren't in their skill set. Haynes King, for whatever reason, he's a coach's kid. He definitely has a lot of really great tools, but his decision making isn't always the best. And Texas A&M was asking him to make reads that were extremely difficult. They're asking him to make extremely, on point timing throws. That's not who King is. That's not who he was. He had a slower release. Look at the end of that Alabama game, that route that everybody wants to criticize. It wasn't necessarily the play call as much as it was, not being the right play for Haynes King. And I think that Bobby Petrino, if you're looking for hope as an A&M fan, he has a great track record of tailoring his offenses to what he has at the quarterback position. So personally, I'm really excited to see what he can do with Connor Wegman. Also, if you're just looking for a little bit of optimism, 5-7 was the fruit of pretty much everything that could have gone wrong going wrong for Texas A&M this year. And I know that's a little bit of a sunshine pumper take, but you look at the injuries, you look at the offense not working out, you look at just losing to Appalachian State. We were all three there in the stadium
That
that
was
day,
tough.
and there was just no energy on the sideline, right? Like there was nothing that could be done to ignite that team. They were going through the motions. And then, that same team, by the end of the year, they've got it figured out and they're upsetting LSU at home and putting up their best offensive performance of the year. So there's talent there. I think there's a coaching upgrade on the offensive side of the ball. I think giving Jimbo less to worry about, just to kind of let him be more of a CEO coach that can handle stuff on the sidelines. He's not having to worry about substitutions. He's not having to worry about coaching his quarterback and calling plays with his Cheesecake Factory menu playbook. He's got less to worry about, and I think that's going to be in and of itself an upgrade. So I'm excited to see how Petrino is able to put Wegman in a place to succeed next year.
Yeah, I think your biggest issue on A&M's squad last year, it just came down to the fact that you had 30 freshmen come in and you were asking them basically to lead. And there was just too much of a weird structure between, well, this is the most talented recruiting class of all time, but also you had all these like upperclassmen that were also there. And then you have like, well, who's the leader? Who's the best receiver on your squad? Who should be the running back? Who should be the quarterback? And you just had too many questions across the entire roster of who's going to step up and lead, and they asked a lot of their freshmen, and to many of their credits, they did step up and play pretty well from the jump. But to another point, I mean, you have that many freshmen coming in who have known each other at max in close proximity 6 months. There's not enough chemistry there. There's not enough trust. There's not enough, ability to rely on each other to make those plays when things get tough. And that's why I think you saw when adversity hit them in the face, they didn't rise to the occasion, right? Nobody thought in that locker room that they would be losing to Appalachian State, but they were, and they didn't know how to handle that. And there was nobody available to step up and say, "I'm the leader. Let's follow me. Here's how we're going to get over this." So from a culture standpoint, that's where you lead off. From an offensive standpoint, I think people want to there's a lot of theories and storylines that go along, and I know that if you're an Aggie fan, you'll understand this. One poster says something on Texags, and everyone just latches onto it. One of the things that kept getting mentioned was how complex Jimbo's offense was, but if you turn on the tape, there wasn't very much complex about his offense at all from a defensive standpoint. It's not difficult to defend Jimbo's offense when you see multiple receivers ending up in the same spot. You see multiple receivers ending up running the same route almost. And from a quarterback perspective, it's way too much to handle, right? Because you're making calls at the line, you're doing all these different things, having to figure that out. So for a quarterback, it's complex to look at. From a defensive perspective, they're not doing anything that's out of the ordinary or crazy. They're not running advanced route concepts. They, spraying guys open. They're kind of relying on each individual receiver to make a call based on what they're seeing in front of them, and then hoping the quarterback knows what route the receiver wants to run, which is why you see so many miscommunications and balls getting thrown to the wrong spots. And so, what I'm hoping personally is that when Bobby Petrino comes in, that he can just say, "Hey, we're going to run a slant because it's 3rd and 4." And because we're not dumb, and because a slant works on 3rd and 4, or a little sit down route, or a little out route, or something like that. And he just understands those. Like, we're hoping that he just understands those things so that hopefully the offense can get rolling again and use some of that talent. The one thing that, should give you hope if you're an A&M fan is Bobby Petrino knows how to use his talent. He will force the ball. Sometimes this, and I guarantee you this will be a complaint, he'll force the ball to his best players. He'll be like, why were we throwing it to a guy that was triple covered? Well, that's because that guy's name is Evan Stewart and he's your 5-star wide receiver, right? That's what's going to happen at times. And you're going to get frustrated, but he's going to use those players. You're not going to wonder, why are we not throwing the ball to this player? Why is he not on the field enough? Why is this guy not touching the ball enough? You're not going to ask that question with Bobby Petrino. And so I think you have to just look at this and take a big step back if you're an A&M fan and say, we asked way too much of the freshmen this year, and the injuries were obviously a concern, and not knowing who your quarterback was a concern. And one of the games, everybody had the flu. And, like you were saying, Trey, like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And, one of the games you played on the road and it was cold and one of your best receivers couldn't play because he was wearing sleeves or something like that. This is all just a dramatic, crazy year. And then what do? You cap it off by beating LSU, which I think for a lot of A&M fans, you just sat there going, well, where was this all year, right? Where the heck was this? Why wasn't I seeing? Well, what you weren't seeing was all those freshmen grew up. You're seeing all these guys who weren't playing a massive role at the beginning of the season finally growing up and having some experience, and Connor Wigman knowing where to go with the ball, and the tight ends and the receivers and everybody else understanding what to do and where their assignment was. And particularly on defense, the bigger issue was, they gave up over 200 yards rushing a game.
Yeah.
That can't continue, obviously. But what was happening? Well, you're going to have either freshmen who don't understand their gap assignment, because obviously a 3-4 to a 4-3 is a different thing, and a lot of these guys probably played 4-3 in high school. And so understanding your gap assignment's a big problem, but also just kind of understanding how to pass people off, how to pass off blockers. What are you trying to do? What's your individual assignment? That's tough when you've only been on campus for 6 months. And so I think the biggest thing for A&M fans is to step back and relax and say, okay, this was a lot of 18-year-olds, and they're only going to be 19 this year. But that was a lot of 18-year-olds that we asked a lot of, and they're going to be 1 year more seasoned. And with a little bit of coaching help and a little bit of a change in scheme, maybe we can get the ball rolling.
Here's something I'm worried about as an A&M fan, and I'm just going to take the professional hat off real quick and just speak as a fan. I don't know that the support staff is there in the way that Jimbo maybe thinks that it's there. And I'll unpack that just a little bit, but one of the things I was most impressed about when Jimbo took over was Jerry Schmidt taking over the strength and conditioning program. This was his first year without Jerry Schmidt, if I recall. And this was the year that the injury bank just completely, it was just overflowing. So I'm not going to say that those two are completely correlated, but there is a little bit of cause for concern for me there in that department. I know that some A&M fans weren't happy with how recruiting went this year, and there's been some rumors about just all kinds of stuff behind the scenes. Look, anytime you have a 5-7 season when you're not supposed to, there's going to be tons of rumors about dysfunction in the program. But yeah, I don't know. That's going to be something that's interesting for me to follow as well. And I know we spent a lot of time talking about the offense. The run defense is kind of what they built their foundation on under Mike Elko, and that was not there. The pass defense was. The pass defense was not a problem, but look, how much of that was because teams knew they could get 5 yards every time they tried to run the ball.
Right. Yeah, running 3-man fronts with and relying on a slim core of linebackers, which has only gotten slimmer. That's definitely one of the things that A&M must fix in this next transfer window. Is look, after spring ball, you talk about the easiest layup that a show like us could ever point to. Fix the linebacking core. Your linebackers played suboptimal football last year. Even Edrin Cooper, who's supposed to be kind of the superstar of that group, he did not play well last year. Was not an effective pass rusher for the majority of the season, and just time after time, you watched A&M linebackers pick the wrong gaps and fill the wrong holes and be out of position. And it was easy for schools like Arkansas and Alabama and Ole Miss to get whatever they wanted on the ground. So the run defense absolutely has to take just a gigantic step forward. I will say, as far as support staff goes, that's certainly right on the money. Strength and conditioning, I don't know if there was one thing that you could point to there, but this year the injury bug was prevalent. And a little known fact that a lot of the national service won't tell you, A&M went without a recruiting director for over half the season. They when they lost Marshall Malchow to Oregon, who has just kicked up a storm up with the Ducks. It took 6 months for them to get their replacement in from Indiana. And so it's just kind of, it's things like that. They let their running backs coach go.
And
Tyler
they hired
Santucci,
a replacement from Indiana too. Like, no shade on the guy, but not
right?
exactly known for big time
Not yeah,
recruiting.
maybe not the sexiest hire. A good track record of recruiting, but not the sexiest hire. Your linebackers coach is now the defensive coordinator at Duke. You let your running back coach go. You don't have replacements for them. It took you a long time to hire Bobby Petrino as the offensive coordinator. Just, there's been a lot of lethargicness seemingly from the outside, where you feel like to fix a program like this, you kind of need to be acting with haste, right? And that just hasn't been what we've seen.
I will say, to push back a little bit. I'm not trying to homer or defend or anything like that, but to push back a little bit. If you're thinking about this from Jimbo's perspective, he had to get everything right because this is kind of his right. All the pressure came down on him. Everyone was talking about how he said, "Oh my gosh," in the contract and the buyout, and are the donors going to come up with $90 million to buy out his contract? None of that was going to happen, obviously. But if you're Jimbo, you're looking at this saying, whoever I hire for my offensive coordinator, whoever I do whatever for, that's got to be the right call. So taking some time to figure that one out and make sure that it's a good fit and make sure that it's going to be good for your culture and good for all these young players and that everything else, and that you're not going to have so many of those young players transfer out. I mean, obviously they had a lot of transfers out, but they did manage to keep a majority of that freshman class and a lot of the talent that was actually on the field this year. So I think you have to give them some credit for taking their time and getting who they thought at least was the right guy. Now, time will tell whether or not Bobby Petrino is the right guy, and who knows who could have been available if they were in a different situation. That's all speculation. There's going to be rumors. Everyone's going to try to break a story there. But at the end of the day, they ended up with the guy who they thought was the best call after probably circling around and looking at a bunch of different options too. And I think you have to give them some credit for doing that. On the defensive side, one more thing on just the rush defense and how much of a struggle that was. One of the things that they started to do towards the end of the season, which resulted in a little bit more success, was they started using in their 3-4 defense, they started making those outside linebacker spots the undersized defensive ends. So like in an I White, and I think Malik Silla was playing there a little bit too at those sort of outside linebacker spots. And I think that's actually a big key there, because if you're those outside guys, number one, you want them to be rush edges in a passing situation, but you also need a guy with a little bit more size than just a smaller linebacker to be able to stand up in your run defense and maintain your gaps around the edges. And so I think that if he can commit to that, if Durkin can commit to doing that, you don't even necessarily need your linebacker numbers to come out, because you had so many really good, talented edge rusher types just sitting on the bench for most of the year. And I think the creativity there is going to go a long way. So we'll see how it ends up playing out next year in terms of positions and personnel and what they do. But I do think that the 3-4 with those bigger edges can work. I mean, it worked plenty against LSU. They weren't able to run the football very effectively for the majority of that game. And so, I think that could be something that they try that ends up with a little bit more success.
They've got so much work to do to finish out this roster. They're currently, I believe they're sitting at 74 scholarships. You can play with 85. So they've got a lot of work to do in the transfer portal. Maybe it's an extra spring commitment or something like that. As we sit here, National Signing Day, the late window, quote unquote, is this next week. So we'll wait and see how the Aggies fill out their roster. I do believe that they can be an 8, 9, 10 win team if you squint. I mean, the talent is still
They
there.
got the talent for it.
They
The
do.
talent has not been an issue.
Yeah, the offense has to rise up and carry them, though. There's no doubt about that.
Gracious hip.